Yeah, that's a good.
Okay, here we go. Here we go. All right, here we go. Guys,
Show begins.
here we go. We're gonna get started here. Hey guys, I'm Harold Osmer. How are you tonight?
Good.
Hey, yeah, what a great guy. We're here to talk about the Venice Grand Prix Road Race. This took place March 17, 1915. I'm sure you can read. So that means just about a year ago is when this thing took place. It was St. Patrick's Day. Happened to be on a Wednesday. It was 85 degrees, a sparkling day in Venice, California. They ran this race only one time, so it was a singular event. They ran it on the roads of Venice. I'm going to tell you a little bit about auto racing history in Los Angeles. Then we'll talk about some history of Venice, talk about racing in Venice, bring it all together, and then there we go. So that'll be it. So I'm glad to have you guys here. So first, really obvious question, you got to think, well, why should we listen to that guy? Well, this guy is a guy who wrote 3 different books about auto racing in Southern California. Also created this nice documentary DVD about it all. Turns out more auto racing has taken place in Southern California than any other place in the world. Over 174 different official racetracks. That's not Uncle Bob's Back 40 and Jefferson Avenue and all this, nope. It's all just official racetracks in Southern California. So that's more than any other place in the world. Now, of course, you can't honestly study this sort of thing without learning a lot about the history of Los Angeles. So that's part of what brings us here tonight. My first book was Where They Raced. It started as my graduate thesis. I have a master's degree in geography. And I looked at where racetracks were, what's there today, and what effect a racetrack had on future land use. The short answer is none. But as I said, the more fun answer is more auto racing has taken place here than any other place in the world. And since we live here, it makes it all the more interesting for us. Being a geography guy, we're going to start with a map. I'm sure you've seen the weather reports and stuff on TV, so you recognize the greater Los Angeles area here. San Fernando Valley is up to the north. Here's the 405 freeway. This blue line marks out where the Santa Monica road races took place. We'll touch on that a little bit later. Here's where the Venice road race took place. Santa Monica operated 1909 to 1919. They skipped 1915, and when they did that, they ran at Venice. There were 3 distinct neighborhoods, let's call it, over here. Back 100 years ago, it was Santa Monica, Ocean Park, and Venice. Okay, we should turn that off. But where we're going to start is over here, right there, where the first auto race took place in Southern California. And it was at the LA Coliseum. Coliseum wasn't there yet. Agricultural Park was there. This is where they had Fiesta Week celebrations. It was the county fair of its day. And they ran for actually a couple of weeks out there, as they do now. But you could still make out a 1-mile horse track. And they had thoroughbred horses and that sort of thing. They came out and they ran horses all the time until the city of Los Angeles decided that you shouldn't be able to gamble on horses any longer. So then they started running cars in order to attract more crowds and that sort of thing. The people who operated the gambling operation, they moved their operation and built their own track at Slauson and Central, just south of Los Angeles, just outside the city limits, so you could gamble there too. And they ran thoroughbred horses there, and that was the first of 4 tracks called Ascot. Eventually that piece of land got sucked into Los Angeles as well, so they couldn't do that any longer, and that's when they really started running a lot more cars.
So when was this picture? What year was that photograph?
This photograph was taken in the late 1920s. The Coliseum had been under construction for just a couple of years, but you can still clearly see the 1-mile horse track from Agricultural Park. Now the grandstand, the main grandstand, was right out here. And they ran counterclockwise. And the reason they ran counterclockwise is because that's the direction the horses went. Well, why did the horses go that way? I don't know. But they just ran the cars the same direction that they ran the horses, because you got to go one direction or the other. Pick one and live with it. Over here is where the museums are, the Rose Garden, and USC would be just off to this side over here. So that was the first auto races that took place in Southern California in 1903. They were running cars that looked very much like this. This guy, Waldemar Grant Hansen, out of Pasadena. He was an early graduate of Throop Polytechnic University. Any guesses? Caltech. So it was Throop Polytechnic. He was a machinist, and he lived in Pasadena. He had his own shop, And he wasn't really an auto builder. He was more of a mechanic type guy, like you say, a machinist. He was learning how to manipulate the metal of its day. We didn't have as good of metals then as we do now. A lot of refinements in technology and whatnot. And this guy was one of the early dudes who was able to set all that up. Now, we did manufacture some engines for the tourist model automobile, which was for the Auto Vehicle Company, which manufactured cars in Los Angeles for probably 20 years. The Tourist was one of the most popular cars that was sold out here, and he developed the engines for that. They also used his engines in the dirigibles, blimps, if you will, that flew around Pasadena. Roy Nobbenshoe was the pilot of those things, but he developed the engines for that. The way he tested his machines and put them under load was he would drive up hills to add load to them. Well, then, it was a small community, so everybody kind of knew when he was going to go out. And if you had a car too, you would go out with him. And part of the reason was you could look after each other. If something happened, something broke down, you'd be there with them. The other thing was, let's see who could get up the hill the fastest, that kind of thing. Notice he's got this big ass horn on here as well. Well, that's because he was sharing the road with horses and the carriages and the farmers and all these other guys. He had to let them know that he was coming and all that. He wasn't a bad guy, you know, he just trying to let them know and dealing with his times. So as they started going up this hill, they found a nice spot in the apricot orchards, about a mile long, and so they could measure their speed going up and down the hill. What this led to was the first annually actually scheduled events that took place in Southern California. Now, the roads came up through the apricot orchards. As you can see here, this is a Stearns automobile. Went between Pasadena and Altadena, about a 1 mile course, about a 12% grade, and they would test the cars going up the road, and you would compete for cash money prizes. In the first year, the idea was to prove how worthy your car was. So you had to run with lights and fenders and the whole bit. They even loaded cars up with people. You know, the whole crazy thing just to show that you could actually make the grade, as they say. And then they started having a little too much fun with this. It lasted for 4 years, from 1906 to 1909. But you can still make out from a lot of these great shots, you can see we're looking down the hill here, so we're aiming up the pole. And if you go out there today, it's Christmas Tree Lane in Altadena. And what it was close to Woodbury Road, and John Woodbury built a mansion up on the hill, and this was his driveway. And so he lined it with these big trees, and so you go out there today, and especially around Christmas time, imagine that, they light up all the trees, and it's a big deal. And it's a state historic landmark now. It's one of the only state historic landmarks for auto racing, although it's not for auto racing, it's for Christmas Tree Lane. This big character back here, who does he think he is? He thinks he is Barney Oldfield. And he became ubiquitous with auto racing, so much so, I mean, he was such a character that later years, the cops would pull over speeders, say, who do you think you are, Barney Oldfield? Yeah, well, yeah, that's how big a character this guy was. Here he's up aboard a Stearns automobile, going up the hill. He never won the race. He was out there for the last 2 years that they ran. He typically finished second for whatever demented reason. But the great big cars, everybody's wearing a hat. It's just a great day. And they did that, like I say, for 4 years. And if you notice, up here, winning speed in 1906 was a Thomas Flyer, 12 miles an hour. 4 years later, 42 miles an hour, almost 4 times as fast. The winning speed was from an Apperson Jackrabbit in 1909. Tells you a couple of things. Number one, guys were getting better about driving up the hills. You know, and the other thing is, cars got a whole lot better too. There was a lot of technological changes that were taking place in the time, and it's evidenced just by the speed right there. The racing had to go away because it was getting too dangerous. People were standing right along the side of the road watching these cars go by. Some of them were reliable, some of them were not so reliable, and some of them didn't work very well. And so they said, well, before people get hurt, we're going to shut this down. And so they did. Another way cool thing about this is, notice this engine here. This was a racing vehicle as opposed to a stock one. And so he's got wide open headers. I mean, these are about as straight pipe headers as you're going to get off a six-cylinder right there. Imagine the noise that thing made. Another thing that's really cool about this one, see this guy back here? It's the only guy in the whole big picture that's not really wearing a hat that's not a race car guy. He's got a headset on now. He's got a special wire that's hooked between him and the end of the line. That's how they time the cars. If you're at Agricultural Park, car gets started, you can click when he crosses the line. He goes around the track, he comes in, you click again when he crosses the line. Bingo, that's your time. Well, what do you do when a guy's going a mile away from you? You can't wait and wave and guess. So at the beginning of the line, they would click and signal when the guy left. The guy on the other end clicks start too. So when he gets up to the finish line, the guy on the other end, he's up there and he clicks and he signals back to the other end. Okay, here, we got him. So now you've got the guy on one end has a start and a finish time, and he writes it down, figures out how long it took him to get there. Guy on the other end, at the beginning of the line, he knows exactly when the guy started, and when he gets the signal back to tell him when he ended, okay, good. They would take the two times, average them, that was your time for going up the road. That's how they determine how fast the guys, or what the time was and who won the event. It's all just pretty basic, pretty straightforward, but they had to decide how they were going to do all this stuff, and they did that. And that was part of the real fascinating thing about this particular era.
So was it a staggered start?
They ran one at a time, and they were just running against the clock. And so they would just go against the clock and go up the hill and say, okay, this is what you did. And typically they wouldn't talk about the guy driving the car who won the thing, Earl Anthony in the Apperson Jackrabbit. No, they would say, the Jackrabbit won the race. That was it. They were touting the car more than any individual driver. Barney Oldfield was kind of changing that game a little bit, though. His name was pretty big because he was a loud guy. All right, we're going to move from that on to some Venice history. Abbott Kinney made a lot of his money in the tobacco industry. A lot of family money came from the tobacco industry. He is also a real estate developer, an environmentalist. He came to the West Coast and went to San Francisco, did a bunch of work there. He also was a good friend of John Muir. So that's where he learned about a lot of environmentalism and developing things in a conscientious way and all that sort of stuff. He came to Southern California and had a bunch of property, and through coin toss, wow, that was hard to say, he wound up with the property for Venice. Now he was a world traveler, and so he decided he would do a real estate development based off Venice, Italy, with the canals and all this sort of thing. Well, part of the trouble was that Venice, Italy was based off of mercantile exchange. You know, the ships were coming in and out, so that's why that place developed. Well, he was going to do a real estate development based off the same idea. So his property was essentially scrubland. It was, I mean, it's nice to say, well, it was pristine wilderness, marshland, bird sanctuary. Okay, but mostly it was a whole lot of nothing. Here's a big panoramic shot from early in the game. We're looking south and west. This winds up being where the baseball field wound up later in the game. This line here is today Venice Avenue. And again, there's pretty much just marshland out here, subjected to seasonal flooding, tidal flooding, and there was very little vegetation. You couldn't do any, there was nothing to mine, there was nothing to grow, there was no trees, no timber, anything like that. And that was a problem with Southern California in general, is that there were no big raw materials to attract a lot of industry. There's no mining industry, no timber, no big fisheries, anything of this nature. There just wasn't that. What did we have? Climate, lots of space, lots of room for things that you don't have in the vertical cities of Chicago and New York and Philadelphia and all that, so people would come here for wide open spaces. Kinney wanted to develop the land and make an arts and culture center in Southern California, and so that was his first initial goal with this. You can kind of make out here, there's a nice bridge, the canal's working across here, it has some gondolas in the water along here, and it's some of the houses were more custom built, others were basically small cottages. And even though you attract people to the area to buy a house and live, there wasn't much for them to do work-wise, because there's no big industry, there's no mines, there's nothing. So you got to find a reason to be here. As we work our way across, again, you can see the canal still working its way along. Eventually we come along to what has later became known, and you go out there today, this is Abbott Kinney Boulevard. I don't know why they name it such an odd sort of thing. Maybe after the guy, would be my guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're still looking west, and we're panning to the right. This is Electric Avenue. And it's significant because it's still there today. The other thing that's fun about Electric Avenue is it became part of the race course later on. we'll get back around to that. But the area here is a little more eastward looking out that direction. And again, there's really nothing out there, and there's no reason to live out there. All of the activity on the beach from Ocean Park in Venice and later on Santa Monica was all right at the beach. They had the piers and all those sorts of things going on out there. There wasn't that much to do. People would come from Los Angeles to the beach to stay there to get away from the heat, pretty much like we do today. Kenny did bring out gondolas and actual gondoliers from Italy to help populate the canals, and it worked out well. Attracted a lot of people. Again, he's trying to sell real estate, so it's a big development sort of thing, and he made up some brochures and touting the arts and culture centers of Venice. Come on out to Southern California's cultural center, you know, express yourself in the artsy ways. And that's what he was after. That's what he was trying to do. Here's Windward Boulevard, Windward Avenue, okay? We're looking straight east. And part of keeping this art theme and the Venetian theme, he insisted on developing the buildings with the arches and the nice colonnades and everything else in keeping with the same theme. It was all part of the game. And that was a fine idea, and it worked out well, attracted a lot of people. This was leading, we're looking east here, and we'll spin around, same road, looking back the other direction now. You can see it continued all the way up. One of the big attractions, you had a little train. If you go out to there's a train museum over in Griffith Park now. They still have one of these operating steam trains over there, and they're still around. And they moved people around, and it was one of the great attractions that you could do in Venice. And it was all part of the scene. It was, again, done by real estate developers trying to get people to come out. And it was just a great time. There was a lot of different things for people to do. A lot of people that came to this area had, never even been to a beach before. What Kenny soon realized was that, arts and culture is nice, but it doesn't really pay the bills. What paid the bills was amusements. There was the Ship's Cafe, which wound up being an actual restaurant parked right by the pier, and they developed all the things that we're more familiar with now at the beaches, with roller coasters, Ferris wheels, all that kind of thing, and they had a pretty good time with it, and they were very successful. This is the Venice Pier. There was another pier at Ocean Park, and eventually there was another one up by Santa Monica, just to help them attract all the people and get to do the different things that they do. And it was a pretty good time. Ways to get around included little electric trolley cars. These were not on tracks, they were just individually controlled. And people could sit on them, and that's how you would move the 2 or 3 miles between the different piers and whatever else you could maneuver in that whole area. They had taxi cabs and other things like that, but they really kept a pretty good tight rein on that. Downtown Los Angeles was really crowded with taxi cabs and horse-drawn carriages and buggies and rail cars and everything else, so it was quite a mess there. So out here they controlled that quite a bit by having these little cars. Here's another really good shot of the car. You can see it, it's empty. You drop your nickel in the thing, you'd sit down, you take your ride, they'd take you up this way and back across the other way. They could go out on the piers on these things and move people around. Worked out really well, it's pretty handy, really. Man, here's another good look at one all loaded up. You can see the guy over here, he had typically 2 handles. One would be for speed and one would be for steering. And you just load them up and drive around wherever you're going. And it worked out really well for him. It's kind of a quaint little way to go about it. These were all electric cars, so they didn't make a lot of noise. They didn't have a lot of spewing fumes and that sort of thing. And they didn't have to go very far, which is part of why it worked.
How'd they power the electricity? Batteries?
Yep, they were battery powered. And I would imagine they plugged them in some way. I haven't found too much information about the specific cars and how they functioned or operated. The big thing was that in the community, they were pretty much the way to get around. And so the community controlled that. They were able to say, look, this is all we're going to allow down here. We're not going to allow Model Ts to drive up and down the boardwalk kind of thing. But they would allow these because they were quiet and slow. They would go maybe 10 miles an hour. But they beat walking. The other thing we noticed in this shot down here, all the women are wearing white shoes, which is kind of fun, and all the men are wearing black shoes. However that works out, I don't know. Big rules there.
So interesting sidebar. At the new Petersen Museum, there's a display on electric vehicles of turn of the century, and there's a Charger from that era that was restored that they have on the display.
It's all good stuff. You know, we like to think a lot of what we're doing today is all brand new. Well, it is brand new, sort of. The ideas are old, though. There's only so many ways to get around. So here's Ed and Edna. They came to the beach. Most of the people who came to Southern California in the early days, I'm guessing at Ed and Edna, there's a little slack there. Most of the people who came to Southern California early on a lot came from Iowa and Illinois. For whatever demented reason, that's a large influx of them. Most of these people had never even seen the ocean before. So that made it really a big novelty for them when they came to Southern California, actually go out to the beach. Of course, they're in their woolen bathing suits and the whole bit. It's all kind of fun, but that was just the nature of the game. She's actually standing in front of a fake backdrop to get her a nice touristy photo, and you know, he looks like he's standing out in front of the roller coaster sort of thing. But there was lots for him to do besides just hang out at the beach. You could practice your alliteration with Vanishing Vexation and Versatile Venice. That's a great line out there. So they had the different flyers and posters. They would hang out all over Los Angeles and in that area especially. That's where they're trying to draw most people to come in from. It's a good shot of a ballroom here that was located on the pier. Very high ceilings, electric lights and gas lights were out there. And they had to have live music to play because they didn't have recorded stuff at the time. You know, it's an interesting little side note that until Edison came along and invented the phonograph thing, every word that was ever spoken, every song that was ever sung, every note ever played is gone. It's a little odd to think about, but that's exactly right. So they had live bands would come out and play. People would come out in their finery and they would dance at the beach and just have themselves a wonderful time. And you could let yourself go free and you could have a great time, but you do have to be careful because there are rules to follow. So just make sure you pay attention to the rules when it comes time. And it's easy to look at these pictures and say, yeah, well, they're a bunch of old fogey looking sort of people. Well, they had hot babes back then too. So there's a hot babe of her day. 1917 Venice. Nice looking lady. Again with a woolen bathing suit. And it's a staged photo, but yeah, she's great looking. Look at that. So there you go. They did exist back then. I know you think, you know, hot women only today. Well, not so much. And you can come on out. Venice Beach is the safest beach. I haven't been able to determine if that means it's safe because there's police out here or it's safe because you're not going to drown and die and kill yourself. I don't know which way it works. But she looks trustworthy enough, so we should go to the beach. Why not? And if you go to the beach, you're going to share some real estate with a whole bunch of people because it was a popular place. If you go out to the beach today, well, maybe not today, but in the current time, you can go down there any given time and it's much cooler and it's nice. You can sit on the sand and it's wonderful. And other times you get out there and the sand is just baking hot. You just cook yourself. And that's all fine. They had the same weather back then as we do now. Comes and goes. And you can get in the water or you can go into the bathhouse and the restaurant and all these sorts of things. And this is the Ocean Park. Notice the shape of the building, top of the roof and the whole bit. That's the same building over here. So now we've moved just a little bit north. We're on the pier. How do I get a pier over here and a pier over here? How'd that happen? We're on the Horseshoe Pier. They built the pier that went out, looped around, and came back. And that was the novelty. Why would you go to this pier? Well, because it's the Horseshoe Pier. It's something different. It saves you from the mundane task of walking to the end of the pier, turn around and walking back. No, you can go out and go all the way around. Okay, whatever you want. There was a whole bunch of different piers that were built over the years. What typically happened, they would last between 2 and 7 years at most. Either they would get wiped out by a storm, or they would burn down, fall over, and then sink into the swamp because there was so much fire going on. They were cooking out there. They had gas lamps and these sorts of things, and they were all made of wood. So it was not uncommon to have big fires. And so the pier would get out, it would run a good long time, then it would burn, then they would rebuild if they could, and they wouldn't if they decided not to. Eventually they started building breakwaters to control that. And breakwaters did two things. Number one, it kept the storm surges down so it didn't wipe out the pier so much. The second thing it did was since it cooled the wave action, it made the sand zone bigger. So if you go to Venice, Santa Monica today, you notice there's a lot of sand out there that you can walk along what we consider beach. You go to a lot of East Coast beaches, that sand zone is really quite narrow compared to what we have out here. That's just nature of the game. Other things to do, Venice Tigers. You saw earlier in the panoramic I pointed out, yeah, there was a baseball field out this direction. Eddie Meyer of Meyer Brewery, based in Los Angeles, built the stadium to house the Venice Tigers, which was a Pacific Coast League baseball team, AA or minor league team. They were only there for a couple of years. They played a lot of games. There's like 200 games to a season. They weren't terribly successful, but it was just a minor league team, and it was one more thing you could do in Venice. Eventually, he moved the team to Vernon, which was closer to Los Angeles, so he could draw more crowd. He built the stadium that would hold 7,000 people. Typically had a crowd of about 500. There really wasn't enough residents in Venice to support a baseball team. But, you're taking your shots, you do what you can. 1914, they held the Junior Vanderbilt Cup race in Venice, because in 1914 they had the Vanderbilt Cup race going on in Santa Monica. So the Junior Vanderbilt Cup race was for kids. You can see, here's the car, belt drive, little simple engine, and if you win, you get this fine pewter cup. Who knows? So there it was. So they held that race out there. One of the way cool things about this was they set it aside for the city streets, and they were holding the big event over in Santa Monica at the same time. So this event was going on in Venice, where you're supposed to just come and have a good time. Instead of a serious time, you can come have a good time in Venice. That's why they put on the race. They ran two different ways, and you'll see it here in a second. Two different ways. They had the motorized cars that would drive around, go so many laps, and whoever wins is so many laps kind of thing. Then they had what amounts to soapbox derby cars, where they started on a ramp, and they would come down, and whoever goes the furthest, or however that worked out. One of the fun things about this deal is Charlie Chaplin came out and shot a movie. And if you go online, you can find this entire movie. Charlie Chaplin, Kids Auto Races at Venice. And if you go online and you look at this movie and you can figure out what it's about, please call and let me know, because I think it's totally pointless. There is no plot line. I have no clue as to what this thing is going about. What's key about this is the first time he appeared on screen as, you guys snickering over here. It's the first time he appeared on screen as the Little Tramp character. So this was the second movie that he made as the Tramp, but this was the first one that went up on the screen. And as you can see him roaming around on the screen here, he has no idea what he's doing. There's the ramp behind him, by the way. Look at all the pennants waving, hey, in the crowd, let's have a good. There's the soapbox derby cars. He's pretty much walking in front of the cameras that were out there to shoot the event anyway, and kind of making it up as he goes along. The crowd didn't know who he was or what he was doing there. He didn't really know, but his director could talk to him because it was a silent movie. So he could, hey, move this way, move that way. So there was probably one guy with the camera and another guy as the director, and then this other guy was not part of his movie, and they kept telling him, get out of the way, get out of the way, cars are coming. Who are you? And that was pretty much what it was about. No one knew who he was, because he wasn't anybody at this point. But it was key, because we've got footage of the race cars going around. He gets smacked pretty good. Whack him. Yeah, there you go. Chase him away. And he gets not paying any attention, going to get run over by the cars. So there you go. Kids Auto Races in Venice with Charlie Chaplin. Go figure. Good fun. Canals. Rialto and Cabrillo is where this is at. If you go out there today, even then it was Rialto and Cabrillo. You can see the nice waterways, the nice bridge, the whole bit. This wound up being an island. It was probably, I guess, what do you want to guess? United States Island? That would be my guess. It says so right there on the sign. You could rent your bungalows and stay out there. It was a great time. Very exotic. If you go out there today and take a look, it looks like that. Clearly it's frozen over. What happened was they designed the canals. They had promises from the city of Los Angeles to dig another inlet. They have only a single inlet, and they were going to keep the water clean through tidal action. Well, with a single inlet and all this canal area to take care of, they didn't have enough water, not enough flow. So the water was supposed to come in and out a couple times a day with the tides and the whole bit. They were going to have an inlet here and an inlet there. They wound up with the one that they built. The city of Los Angeles was supposed to put in the other one. Los Angeles never came through on that because Venice had not annexed into Los Angeles at the time. Said, well, since you're not us, we're not going to put any money into your real estate development. And that's what happens. So the water in the further parts got to be pretty shallow, wound up to be very swampy, mosquito infested, hot, sticky, gross, muddy, and there's a reason why it went away. Later on, Venice annexed into Los Angeles in 1925. And I'm sure there were some backroom dealings that said, as soon as you annex in, we'll go ahead and control your canals. And what they did was they said, we're going to pave them over. So Venice brought a lawsuit against the city of Los Angeles, said, you said you were going to do this, and they took it to the state Supreme Court. State Supreme Court says, well, you're part of the city now. You fall under their jurisdiction. Whatever they want to do, that's what they're going to do. And so they paved the large parts of the canals. That's why they went away. Had they looked after it early on, they could have taken care of that. Had Venice and Ocean Park and Santa Monica got together early on and put some egos aside, they could have become one city unto themselves. They chose not to. Therefore, you wind up as an individual piece, and you're still 20 miles away from the downtown. So even though you think you got representation in town, you really don't. They lost out. That's why it went away. There was no bad guy that showed up and did any of that. It was just a matter of you guys couldn't get over yourselves, so it went away. And if you go out there today, you'll notice there's a lot of places that are like this. You can still find these areas, and it's quite interesting because it's still there. We have a small part of it still exists. We'll show you some of that a little bit later, so you can still find some of the history out there because Venice, as a community, was able to stand up and say, hey, look, we want to fight for this one little section, and so they did, and they won out, and there you go. And over the years, the last 100 years, it's had its ups and downs so far as nice place to live, not nice place to live, dangerous place, all these kind of things comes and goes. Now it's a pretty popular sort of place. But here you get the same views. You can take a look at it, and it's great. This is Rialto and Cabrillo roads now. And if you get along Windward, back in the day, this is what it looked like. Camels and all, good fun. And if you go out there a little bit more modern day, same scene, same street. They've maintained the curves, the nice colonnades. There's a little bit of gap here. Some of the buildings were lost to fire, neglect, and whatever else, but they still continue down on the end. And if you get along the boardwalk, there's still multiple places that still have this sort of feature to them, and that's part of the big allure of going to Venice Beach today as opposed to some other beach, because it has that character to it. And you feel like you are someplace, and it's a nice place to go, and that's what it's about. What does that have to do with Venice? Cops! Yeah, big cops in Venice. No, it has nothing to do with that. I'll give you another hint. Here's the other hint.
Big Daddy.
What's the combination between the two?
Right.
This guy. But Ed Roth, Big Daddy Ed Roth, who made a pretty good living as a car designer and builder and whatever else, and the Beatnik Bandit and all these kind of things. He also made some good money making signs for Knott's Berry Farm. He did not live in Venice. He did not have his shops in Venice. What's the big deal? Revell Model Kit Company was located in Venice from the mid-1940s forward. So if you built these model kits and whatever else, chances are it came out of Venice. That was a pretty good time. I also learned that the model ships that they made, like for the Missouri and the New Jersey and all these kind of things, the Russians bought them and studied them to learn how the Navy ships were built in America because they didn't have good enough intelligence, but the model company did, and they were concerned with accuracy, so there we go. It all worked out, but that was a big part of Venice history, was the Revell Model Kit Company. I was more of an airplane guy, but the car stuff was still cool, and it all came from right down there.
Does Revell still exist today?
It exists as another company. They've been bought out and moved along the line, but they're no longer in Venice. Recognize this guy?
Carol Shelby.
Carol Shelby, there you go. Hey, the crowd is alive. Look at that. He had several shops, offices, garages, whatever you want to call it. A couple of them were in Venice. He moved from place to place as he expanded and did different things and stuff. And so that was way cool. And that's that other automotive connection. Look at all these gauges, all this information he has. You know who would have really loved to have that kind of information about his car? This guy, Harris Handshoe. Race car driver. Looks like a race car driver. So he was pretty popular up and down the West Coast. He won the first Santa Monica road race in 1909 aboard an Epperson Jackrabbit. Same car that won the hill climb, the final hill climb. You can notice in this car, he's got 2 tanks back here. One is for fuel, one is for oil. He's got a mechanician that rides with him. It's his job to pump up the fuel pressure and the oil pressure and keep that going while this guy tries to keep the car on the road. So Handschuh was a reasonable driver. He won a few races. And he's also the guy that has the dubious distinction of being the first automotive racing driver to crash at the LA Motordrome, which was in Playa del Rey. This is a 1-mile circle made out of wood. And we're looking kind of northwest in this shot. Made out of wood. Total circle, 1 mile around, was built by a guy named Jack Prince, who built several board tracks, which came along later. This was the first board track for automobiles in the world, and it was at Playa del Rey, which is right next to Venice. Duh, go figure that. So here you go. Nice look at the track under construction. It was 2x4s on edge. You think, well, geez, that was a lot of lumber. I said, well, that's what they built with back then, and they were really good at it. And it was really a simple framing job. So it didn't take too long for them to put it all together. If you get enough guys, and you have enough lumber on hand, you can put one of these together in a short amount of time. You can see here it operated from 1910 to 1913. There's a famous author, writer guy, Damon Runyon, and when the place burned down, he says, he's quoted as saying, you know, the Motordrome burned last night with a great savings of human lives. Well, I don't know where that ever came from. I've tried looking up that thing, and so if any of you guys can figure out where that was written, I'd like to know, because I haven't been able to find it. But it shows up a lot of times. Anyway, so this track is 45 feet wide, 2x4s on edge, 18-degree banking, 1 mile per lap. It eventually burned down. Vagrants lit some fires and whatnot, and it didn't burn the entire thing, it just burned a good part of it. So once you build a speedway, you need to promote the place. You need to bring people out. This is the entire back page of the local, what was this, LA Herald Examiner from May 4th, 1912. This is the back side of the page that was reporting on the Santa Monica races of the same year. So you're reading the races stuff on the front, you get this big full-page ad on the back, which is just great stuff. We don't talk like this any longer. Short, snappy races, greatest speed kings, you know, most daring drivers, all this kind of thing. It's just fabulous. It was a wonderful time. And you come out to the racetrack, this is what it looked like. Sitting on the racetrack, cars hauling around, 18-degree banking, cars out there just hanging on, doing all they could. What they didn't really count on, though, was they thought with the banking, you'd go flat out the whole way and you'd go really fast. But they didn't count on centrifugal force kind of pushing you up as you start going faster and faster. So, and they didn't have much traction, clearly. But you could get right up close and personal and watch the races go by. It was a pretty good time. We get another shot here. Cars coming around the track. These were stripped down stock cars. Because again, it's 1910. They didn't really have specialized racing cars. So you could almost imagine these guys with carriage work, fenders, overhead parts of lights, the whole bit. And that's really all it was. Notice some of them are right-hand drive, some of them are left-hand drive. It's way cool. But again, you could get right up close and watch them go. It was a 1 mile track, so it was the first time you could really go someplace and watch cars moving all the way around the thing. On a road race, cars would come by every 8 or 10 minutes because the road races were so big.
There's somebody moving over there.
Oh yeah, that's live action shots. That's live action, that's great stuff. Fastest motorcycle for the first accredited 100-mile-an-hour motorcycle was at the LA Motordrome. Lee Humiston. Shake, old boy, good work. Look at that. You went 100 miles an hour, 1912. Excelsior. Fastest car, a little bit later, Teddy Tetzlaff, 1913. Just under 100 miles an hour. Again, it was centrifugal force. The trick with the motorcycle was it was lightweight. You could stay down low, you didn't push up quite as much. Neither of them had very good acceleration, but they could, through gearing, get up some pretty decent speed. And that's how it worked out. So it was the first accredited 100-mile-an-hour lap by a motorcycle, and it was a little bit faster than the fastest car could run out there at the time. And it's just incredible. It was a 1 mile circle. Here's a program cover for the event, Turkey Night, 1910. after the races, take a trip to Venice.
Is that the turkey nights that we're still running today?
They didn't call it Turkey Night back then, but I'm going to. Yeah, why not? They've been running Turkey Night since 1935. That started at Gilmore, of course, and it still runs today. This year they're going to do it out at Ventura, which would be good fun. They've been running it at Venice for a while, or at Paris for a while. But here's the program cover, and it's touting all kinds of different things. Fast cars. We're out here by the beach. You can get over to where all the stuff is happening. You can go eat a nice dinner and be down at the pier and do all these wonderful things. It was terrific. It's an official program, and that's where the track was located. Of course, being a geography guy, here goes another map for you. Where exactly was the Motordrome located? Right where the circle is. I didn't draw that. That showed up actually on the map. Here's the ocean out on my side of the thing. Piers were located over this way. This is Bayona Lagoon, they called it. It's the swamp. So, there you go. These straight lines are railway lines. Machado refers to the family name that owned the property from the Spanish land grants. And this is where the racetrack was. The trains would come down here. There's this little spur track that the Pacific Electric built so they could bring people in and out and pull them off of the main line so they would be out of the way when they're loading and unloading the different passengers. And if you went out there today, you would be located right there.
What was a typical crowd at one of these shows?
Several hundred. They didn't know how to operate events very well or how to promote them. They didn't know how to build up the drama of the events to lead to some meaningful end. So they had a lot of match races between one driver versus another or one car versus another, but they didn't have enough knowledge of the game yet to be able to produce something to where you start off with, say, qualifying, heat races, semi-main, and then big main event. They didn't do that sort of thing. It was all batch races. But the cars were not very reliable at the time either. So there you go. Again, this is where the train lines originally came through, but you can see it's a modern map. This is where it would be located. There's no parts left of this thing anymore. The creek was channelized in the 1930s. The marina was developed in 1961, 62, and that range is when that got started over there. And that's where it would have been, the Motordrome. Another thing that's interesting here is you can make out on this blue line, that's the inlet to the last of the existing canals for Venice up here. The other canals for this would have been just off the screen up to the right, and they were connected into the same waterway, but that was further inland, and there was supposed to be another pumping system and drain pipe put in over there. They never got there. But this one still maintains, and that's what feeds that line there. So that was the Motordrome. Another look up Windward Avenue. We're going to get over and take a look at the Daredevil Race for Life, but I want to point out something else to you real quick here. We see a lot of these colored postcards that are out there today. And it's kind of neat. It gives you a little feel for what was going on, the activity, the fun, all these kind of things. They didn't just get some guy to come out and paint this stuff. He actually started with a photograph. Then they get these guys with two bristles on their brush, and they go through and they paint all the different colors in to make it into an actual postcard. And they would use that to promote the area because they didn't have color photography at the time. So that's kind of fun. And just understand how that was done. And here you can see the water back here in the background. You're able to color that in. With a black and white shot, it's very difficult to see that. So that's why, you like the color, a little more lively. Promote our area. Why not? All right, Daredevil Race for Life. Today, it's a parking lot. Back then, it was the Daredevil Race for Life. Big wooden bull. If you imagine the circus thing today, where they got the metal cage and the guy in the motorcycle goes around, well, this was similar, except it was in a big wooden ball. 70 feet in diameter, you can make all that out. 75-degree banking, you had to get up to 55 to 60 miles an hour to be able to drive around on the inside of this. And people would come up and stand along the edge. You can see even down here, here's the heads from the guys standing over on this edge in the shadows. And people would be right up here, look at this little kid sitting on that thing. We wouldn't do that today. We couldn't allow that. And the guy would come out and drive around, the guy's down in the bottom, there he is, racing for his life, and how dangerous can you be, and all these kind of things. That was a wonderful time.
They still do it to this day.
Yeah. Oh, it's great stuff. So he's out here, you can see this is a T-head 4-cylinder. It's a Haynes automobile. The wheelbase on this is 120 inches, which is roughly what today's cars are today. So it's not, that much bigger. It looks bigger because he's so high up. All the suspension is below the frame and all that sort of thing. 40 horsepower, 700 cubic inches, 4 cylinders, and the whole thing. It was crazy. This was, again, a stripped down stock car, though. You can see a lot of the metal work and stuff here, the framework that's still there for mounting the running boards and the fenders and all the carriage work and everything else that went on there. So they just stripped it down so it looked cool and scarier and all that. Race for Life operated from 1911 through early 1913. Al Vershane drove the Haynes motor car through most of 1912. He's a real popular guy. He was out there, he'd run the event, very consistent. He'd get out there to show, he'd go for about 10 minutes, driving around in circles. People would pay their 50 cents to watch him go. Late 1912, he started getting a little careless, and so the operator thing came out and drew a red line in paint around it. Some people think, well, I was telling him don't go above the red line. Well, got to figure he already knew not to do that. But he painted the red line in, and now people knew, oh, he can't go above the red line, can he? Oh, this kind of stuff. Well, he grew despondent after a while, separated from his wife, and eventually went too far above the red line, over the top, broke through the railing, sent splinters all over the place. The car tumbled to the bottom, crushed him. That was the end of Al Vershane and the Daredevil Race for Life. That was December of 1912. Like I say, it operated for another couple of months after that, but that was pretty much the end of that. Just how it goes. All right, we're going to talk about a few myths. Again, just in the Venice Ocean Park area. Wouldn't it have been great to have a place at Ocean Park back in the day, 100 years ago? Well, here you go. 100 years ago, that's what you'd have been living in, a little shack by the beach. There's nothing out there. You don't have a job because there's no work. You're exposed to the waves. Your house is going to be gone before too long. That's just the way it works. There's not that much out there. It's not as exotic as you'd like to think. It would be fun for us to go back, time travel for a couple of weeks, maybe hang out and see what it was like, and then come back home where we have running water and electricity and indoor plumbing and all that sort of thing. So this is Ocean Park, oceanfront development, 100 years ago, 1902 actually. So it's more than 100 years ago, but that's how exotic it really was. Next we'll talk about Speedway. If you go out to Venice today, there's alleyway pretty much more than anything else. It's paved, but it's an alley called Speedway. It's not Speedway Drive or Speedway Avenue, Speedway Road, nothing, nope, just Speedway. They never raced on Speedway. They never went to the racetrack via Speedway. What it was the first paved road west of Los Angeles. And it was paved by real estate developers because Los Angeles is about 15 to 20 miles away from the beach. And so when you drive your car with your whole family and everything over the rutted roads, such as they were back then, get out there, you can't go very fast, but when you get to the beach, you can get on Speedway, drive your car at speed while you're here. You notice this nice piece of property over here, you ought to get some of that. And so that was the whole idea. And it still exists today, which makes it a little bit fun. Next thing is Culver City Speedway. This was a small track, started as a Greyhound dog track, Washington and Lincoln. If you go out there today, it's Costco, but they also ran jalopies, and they put the jalopies on TV in the 1950s, and it was good fun. They ran midgets. This happens to be a midget program from Culver City Speedway and Stadium. It was right out there. It was a good time. Next one we'll talk about real quickly is Redline cars, Pacific Electric. They fed the area. They brought people out. And General Motors and the evil oil companies bought them out and took them away and just tore them all out. No, didn't happen. No conspiracy, anything going on. What happened with the red lines was they were very expensive to maintain. They were all built by private companies, and they were built very cheaply because the initial lines went in to bring people from Los Angeles to some real estate development. So the developers would put them in, and they would cut whatever corners they could just to get the trains to go out and back. All right, so 10 or 15 years worth of this cheap construction operating, pretty soon it needs maintenance. And the cars need maintenance, and moving people never made any money. So there was no big conspiracy thing to make them go away. If you want to know more about that, just contact me sometime. I can turn you on to all the real story on why that went away. Had really nothing to do with conspiracy theories and General Motors and all that sort of stuff. All right, here we go. So that's the background on the racing. That's our Venice area history. We're going to bring it all together. This is the backside of that newspaper we saw a little bit earlier with the Motordrome ad on it. Tetzlaff wins the big race, record smashed. This is why you run races. This is why a city would run races, because you could get big time headlines. People in Chicago, New York, Philadelphia would look at them and say, look at that, they're driving cars and it's February. Yeah, it's snow and mud and crud out here. Let's move to California where they don't have this stuff. So that's what it was all about. This is 1912. And in Santa Monica, they ran from 1909 to 1919. The course ran along Ocean, got to Wilshire, went up Wilshire to the old soldiers' home, and came back down San Vicente. It was an 8.5-mile course. They ran from 1909 to 1919. And in 1914 and 1916, they ran the two biggest races in the country at the time. They were the Vanderbilt Cup and American Grand Prize races. These were the single biggest events in the country at the time, and the biggest motorsports events at the time. Nothing was bigger than auto racing in this particular time period. Yeah, they had baseball, they had boxing, they had these other things, but there was no television, no radio, anything like that. Auto racing was the single biggest draw. So, in 1915, when they did not hold the race because the organizers decided to move it to San Francisco with the Pan Pacific celebration up there, Venice decided, well, let's have a race here. We'll do it ourselves. And they said, okay. So now they didn't run the Vanderbilt Cup and Grand Prize race because that got moved to San Francisco. And when they got to San Francisco in February, it rained. It was miserable. They delayed the race a couple of weeks. They had to rebuild the course. You know, all kinds of drama. The American Grand Prize race, half the guys stopped partway through because it rained so hard. It's too dangerous. Miserable. Had they run it on that same scheduled dates in Santa Monica like they wanted to originally, they would have been fine. And they probably would have never had the Grand Prix race at Venice. We wouldn't all be here today listening to this fine gentleman talk. So here's the program for the event. This is a pennant, a felt pennant. Today you get a t-shirt. You know, back then you had a felt pennant you would get and wave, and a couple of these still exist. And this one down in here, I don't know if you can really make that out. It says, at the death curve. Well, in Venice, they didn't have Dead Man's Curve, but the artwork was still great, and it was good fun. Here's a couple of guys that did not come to the race. Big name guys. 3 of them. All 3 were in San Francisco. The race finally ran in San Francisco 2 weeks prior to the Venice race. These 2 guys, Dario Resta and Ralph De Palma. Now, Resta won both races up in San Francisco. And De Palma ran 4th in one, and he pulled off when it started raining in the other. It was so close to the race time here that they would have had to really scramble to get their cars ready to come down. So what they wanted was appearance money to make the race. And the guys in Venice said, no, we don't want to pay you to come down and do this. Earl Cooper was a big-time popular guy, Southern California, won a lot of races down here. He was up at San Francisco as well. Rained so much, he got pneumonia. And it was so bad that 3 weeks later, he still couldn't drive. So he didn't get to drive either. But there was 3 really big names that did not drive at Venice. Okay? How would they have gotten to the track had they got there? Had they come down? Well, here's Los Angeles. Most of these are rail lines that were in place. So that's why I say probably 15 miles if you take this route and 20 miles if you take the other. You know, speeds probably vary, this kind of thing. And you'd come down and you would find the Venice race route down here. Here's the Venice Pier, Ocean Park Pier, and Santa Monica. This is the old Santa Monica course. Fun part about this, real road racing again, these roads still exist. The Venice roads still exist. They're on the real roads, which makes it so much fun for being out here. Venice race course was set up over on this side, clearly a smaller, just over 3 miles per lap. At Santa Monica, it was 8.5 miles per lap. And we're still going to run 300 miles, which means you got to run 97 laps to make up your 300 miles, and that's how it works. But that's how you get from here to there. And once you got here, that's what you'd see. Nice. Here's the pier, Ocean Park Pier. All the canals are over in this area, this direction. This is Electric Avenue right here. We saw that earlier in that panoramic shot. And I can prove it to you because some guy came up here with red pencil and filled it in. These roads are still here. They ran counterclockwise around the course. It's like just over 3 miles. This is the main grandstand. The start-finish line was here. They would come down to Venice, turn left. This turn was banked with wood. They got out those circus elephants from the Barnes Circus, and they built the wood up to make banking so that you could go faster around the corner because it's such a tight corner to make. They did the same thing up on this corner as well as this one, so they had 3 banked corners out of wood. Way cool stuff. And a nice long straightaway. They put up this canvas fence to try to keep people from sneaking into the event without paying for a ticket. It was moderately successful, but played out about as well as you would think. You know, when somebody sees everybody getting through, it's kind of how it worked. And that's just how it worked out. But okay, what we're going to do is we're going to wind up we're going to get down here and we're going to look at the starting line and we're going to take a lap around the course. Here's the guys lined up. These are all the drivers at the starting line. You see a lot of pictures if you look at the old Los Angeles or old Indy pictures, for instance. You get guys all lined up across the main straight, and that's what a panoramic kind of shot. That's what these guys were posing for here. And there's your drivers, alphabetical order and kind of cars they were driving. And these are their driving suits. Today they got nice fancy driving suits and, you know, stickers all over them. Here they had Stutz and pointy gas. You can see Rich Lube and Richfield Oil. That became Atlantic Richfield, which is Arco. And these things are still around. And they were just having a good time. These are their helmets. Oh yeah, lovely, driving in regular shoes. Some of them wore gloves, most of them did not. And you had a driver and a mechanic, or a mechanician. And the mechanic, his job was to keep the oil pressure going and the fuel pressure going, and look out for cars coming one way or the other, that sort of thing. And help you change a tire if you blew a tire on the back straightaway, that sort of stuff. They never switched positions to finish the race or anything like that. If you're in the main grandstand, looking at the start line, there you are. And this is Electric Avenue. Just as it's turning, Venice would be just off to the lower right of our screen here. 85 degrees this day, out in the sunshine, Wednesday, bright, sparkling day, which is why we live in Southern California. We don't have any big industry in Los Angeles. We do have sparkling weather, and that's why people come here. And eventually we created things for ourselves to do so that we can all live here and do this. Folding chairs, wooden chairs. There's no fence, there's no safety rails, anything like this. You go to Long Beach today, they're racing on their streets, but they got K-rail and fencing and catch things and all kinds of stuff. Back then, they didn't know any better. And they would just come out and say, well, don't walk across the racetrack. Well, don't sit up too close to the line. Well, you knew the possibility existed when you got down here, didn't you? And so that's just pretty much how it all worked out. A lot of the ladies have the parasols. Everybody's wearing a jacket and a hat. Nobody goes without that sort of thing. And I always thought it was a little weird to see start finish. You know, you do a race and you go from here to, well, you have to if you're making laps. But it's just always struck me as a little bit odd. Why would you spend all your time to get back to where you started? Here you can see these lines, these phone lines. It's actually power lines to power the trolley car that ran along Electric Avenue, which is still out there today. So we come down here to the main start. They did not start as a bunch like they do today. You know, take the pace lap, pace car pulls off, and they go all together. No, they didn't do that back then. Partly because they have open wheels and it's extremely dangerous. The other part is they have open wheels. It's extremely dangerous, and you got a lot of smoke and dust and everything else going on. They just didn't want to do it, so they would turn them loose at 10-second intervals. You go, next guy goes, next guy goes, this kind of thing. So we got Rickenbacker, Eddie Rickenbacker, later known as Captain Eddie Rickenbacker, World War I flying ace, all that sort of business, future president of Eastern Airlines, starting up here on the front line in this Maxwell. Durant Chevrolet, it was actually a Stutz, but he painted Chevy on the side anyway. He wound up being one of the first CEOs for General Motors, that same guy, Cliff Durant. You see Chevrolet written back here. This is a banner that was against the wall which marked off where his pit was located. So there was that. Well, Rickenbacker went and talked to Eddie Pullen, who was going to be the last guy to get started. And there were 10-second intervals, and he did the math, and he said, hey, I'm going to be coming around right about the time they're turning you loose. You make sure you go this way, I'll make sure I go this way so we don't run into one another. Well, it turned out to be a moot point because by the time he came around, Eddie Pullen realized he had stripped his gears and was not going to go anywhere in the race. He had a 300-mile race. He went about 30 feet and was done, and it was too bad. Because he'd won a lot of races, Pullen had. In fact, he won that 1914 American Grand Prize race at Santa Monica. So here we are on Electric Avenue. Let's go take a lap. Let's start going this way. Woo! Get out of the way. Here they come. This is Venice turning onto Lincoln. We are now looking south, so they're coming towards us. You can see where the turn is here, made of wood. They had filled this in with some asphalt, and they called it, oil, dirt, gravel, to make it smooth so the cars could transition onto the boards and off of the boards. Cars were able to park right along the race course. This must be the beach lady from before, the twirly thing. But anyways, so people were right along the side of the race course. They could watch the cars go by. It was a 3-mile course. Guys are going about 70 miles an hour, so it's roughly 3 minutes, give or take. You could watch your car come by again. Plus, they had 18 cars in the race. So every couple of seconds, you got another car going by. Sometimes they were close together. Sometimes they were spread out. It just came at random. This is way cool because this guy up here provides us with this shot over here. Coming and going. Same corner. That is way cool. Look at that. This guy back here took this shot. This is the other side. Clearly the guy that took this shot is this guy over here in the black shirt. And he's aiming this way. He's on the bridge. That's how he got up high, looking this direction. And it's just way cool to even just have these shots going both directions at the same time. Well, this isn't the same time, but the same location. It's pretty cool. The other thing is this guy is a Bugatti, driving a Bugatti, John Marquis in a Bugatti. And on lap 55, he happened to be going 70 miles an hour right by the main grandstand when an old fella, 70-year-old J.N. Ortiz, decided to cross the racetrack. And illustrate why you don't cross the racetrack in the middle of a race. He got hit by John Marquis. Took him off at the knee. His lower part of his leg went flying 60 feet down the way. You know, and it was right in front of the main grandstand. Everybody saw it. The guy was out walking across the track for whatever demented reason. Marquis did not crash. He pretty much went by, boom. What was that? And that was it. Well, they got to Ortiz. They were able to put a tourniquet and everything on him, hauled him off to the hospital, and he survived. But it was just a big deal to him. Also, on about lap 20, the main scoreboard collapsed. Now you got to imagine it was 2x4s and framing, whatever else, and they got guys up there changing numbers to tell you what position everything. And that's why you want to be in the main grandstand, because you get all the race information. And they had so many guys standing on it, it collapsed. 2 guys got hauled off to the hospital on that one. A handful of people got hurt with that as well. So you got to be careful in these kind of things. Marquis, now mind you, this is 1915, and Marquis was made famous the previous year at the American Grand Prize race when he did this, and this picture was seen around the world. Here we go. This is Ocean Boulevard turning onto Wilshire, and Marquis turning turtle in the sunbeam. Tipping over. Of course, they're going to put their hand out because they're going to catch themselves. Sure he is. And his mechanic's got his arm bent and the whole thing, and the sunbeam is rolling over. This American Grand Prize race, he had just passed for the lead coming down San Vicente, and he probably in his pits, somebody waved at him and said, "You got the lead." So now he's got the lead. And so, in my thinking, he got excited, overcooked the turn at Dead Man's Curve. Nobody ever died at Dead Man's Curve, and this happened the year before, so clearly he survived to race another day. Why we include all this, and what's way cool about that is, see this dude back here? That dude took this shot at the same exact moment as that car is rolling over. So now we got a shot coming straight at you, Marquis turning over, going away from you with Marquis turning over. Again, you can see the arm straight, the bent arm, tipping over, tipping. Turning turtle, as they said. This was 1914 that these 2 guys got coordinated, and we actually have these 2 shots. It's just incredible that they still exist, that they're out there. I mean, guys were taking pictures all the time. They were doing a lot of this, but much of that stuff gets lost. So it was real exciting for someone like myself to find that. And I'm really happy to be able to share that with you. So that was John Marquis in 1914. Came back to race the next time. He finished, I think, 4th at Venice the following year. So he was still alive. Rickenbacker, Disbro in the Simplex. We're headed north. We're back to our lap around the racetrack at Venice. They're coming up to Rose Avenue. So we're on Lincoln. We're going to turn on to Rose. We're coming along. Again, you can see the banking of the curve, how it kind of rolls in and moves around. Mountains in the background, bright, sparkling day. Woman on the race course just standing out there watching. Why not? Because you can. And also, the next thing to notice is that just to the east, which is out this way, there's no development. There's no houses, there's no buildings, no McDonald's, Starbucks, whatever. None of that's out there. It was just wide open territory. So you go from there to, Barney Oldfield, Maxwell, showing you how to get around a wooden turn. He's on Rose. He's going to turn on the Hampton. John Parsons in the Parsons Special showing you how not to go around a wooden corner. Now, in today's world, you could do this. If you have a sprint car and you see that, it's pretty common. See guys turning right to go left kind of a thing. Well, you have a lot of throttle response, a lot of throttle control, extra power. You can spin the wheels just enough to get everything to control and you can handle it. He did not handle it. He didn't go completely off the course, but he did hit the wooden railing and send splinters all over the place. He didn't kill anybody, but he made a mess of things and injured some people in the process. He did manage to finish the race, but that's how not to go around a wooden turn, and that's what happens. You can see there's people standing in the background back here to kind of give you some more scale to it all. And that's where we are. We're on Rose Avenue, turning on to Hampton. And I'm going to remind you real quick of what a race course is. Now, this is where we started. Here's where we had that before and after shot going around the corner. Coming up, turning along Rose, and now we just, that last shot with Parsons spinning out was right along Rose. Now we got a nice shot. We're coming to the main straightaway, heading for home. And heading for home, we've got this shot. Glover Ruxtel up front, and Art Klein behind. There's a couple of way cool things about this shot. Okay, two way cool things about this shot. Number one, we're on the roads in Venice. We're actually having a race. The top drivers in the country are out here on our streets driving. It's way cool. They banked the turns out of wood so they could do even faster times. It's bitchin'. Wonderful stuff. Way cool thing number two. He's on the right side. He's on the left side. Wait a minute. They couldn't even decide which side to be on. So they chose both sides. Fine political move there. Way cool thing number three. I lied, there's more than two. Way cool thing number three. Look at this guy. And his friend. You better have a friendly friend down below. They're watching the race from the pole. Way cool. You've heard of pole position. Well, that's the guys. All right, I lied. 4 way cool things. 4th way cool thing. If you go out to the same spot today and look out that way, you will find that that building is still there. Today, it is the Full Circle Spiritual Community Center. And they do yoga, meditation, art classes, things of this nature. It fits in perfectly with the Venice beach scene. They're just a couple of blocks away from the beach in this particular location, and it's still there today. And it's just a way cool thing to know that that's still out there, 100 and some years later? And it's right out there, right where the race course comes around it. So that's great that that's out there and still looks very much the same as it did back then. Only today it's in color. So. All right, so here we are. Coming down to the main straight, headed for home. Who wins this race? Who do you think's going to win this race? I'll bet it's that guy. It's not Dave Lewis in the Stutz, that's for sure. Dave Lewis had a 2-lap lead, 7-minute lead over everybody. He came by and he got the green flag, signifying 1 lap to go, of course. True story. They didn't decide on a regular system for the flags until much later. So the green flag at Venice meant you got 1 lap to go. They did wave a checkered flag. In 1913 is when they finally decided, pretty much with AAA rules, that we wave the checkered flag to signify the end of the race. So they're waving the checkered flag or somebody besides Dave Lewis. Lewis had the lead. He came by, got the green flag. He's going to win. His pits are going crazy. All his guys are coming together, and he didn't come back around. And he still didn't come, and time's going by. He broke a crankshaft on the back straightaway, and he was done. Most cars that did not finish failed because of typically oiling or fuel line systems. They would just break because they were, copper tubes or metal tubes that went places, and the fittings would come loose and it would spew all over the place, and then your valves would go bad or your crankshaft would get lost or you would lose fuel pressure or whatever it was, and that's why you didn't finish most times. Rarely, you would crash occasionally, but that wasn't the big issue here. It was just all the bouncing and rattling going on for 4.5 hours out here on this race course for 300 miles. So, who won? Barney Oldfield won. You want to know how I know? I was there. I know. Part of the fun of where we are today, and everybody's in on it now, using the system that we're using to record this is that you can put yourself in as part of a green screen kind of thing, and through the layering of the system, you can work yourself right into the picture and do things. This was just kind of a fun, silly sort of thing to do, but it shows one of the aspects of how you can have fun with a system like this, and that's a good time. Oldfield did win the race. It was a 300-mile race, 97 laps. He's talking with Coal Oil Billy Carlson. They were both of the Maxwell team. They finished 1-2. 2 weeks later in Tucson, they finished 1-2 again, Oldfield and Carlson. It was a good time. They won the race.
What speeds were they doing? Oh,
There you go. They averaged 68 miles per hour. Oldfield did not stop in the pits. Everybody else had to stop for some reason, either for fuel or more oil or a tire change. If you did, that of course slows you down. Well, if you can set a little bit easier pace, as it were, you could save your tires. Tires were the big things that would give up, aside from other mechanical failures out there. So the Maxwell finished first and second again. And 2 weeks later, they won at Tucson, did the same thing. And Barney Oldfield, you see he's got his trademark cigar here. He was a real popular barnstormer in the early days, and he used his cigar when he drove. It wasn't lit. He would keep it in there to keep his teeth from mashing together and messing up his teeth as he drove around the race course. So it became his big trademark sort of thing. It was a big time, larger than life sort of popular figure. This is why you race. This is why we hold races. So you can get headlines and advertising and sell tires and sell Venice and the weather and all kinds of neat stuff. That's what it was about. Promotion, popularity of all these sorts of things. Here you can see the winning time was 4:24, which meant about 3 minutes, give or take, per lap overall. Bugatti, Marquis, the guy who tipped over, he finished fourth. The way these things ran was you said you got to complete 300 miles. So when Oldfield won, if you were a couple of laps behind, you still had to finish the 300 miles in order to be considered finishing the race. They later learned that after the leader finishes, we just call the race off, because people would come onto the race course and cheer and be happy and start to celebrate. But you still got cars at speed out there. So they would flag the cars off, is what they would call it. You would be flagged off. So let's talk a little bit about Barney Oldfield. Again, you see his mangled cigar at the end of a race here. Barney Oldfield was born in Ohio. He was a bicycle racer. He did a lot of barnstorming stuff. He's the guy that made Henry Ford famous. Henry Ford made him famous. It worked both ways. Ford made more money, but Oldfield was a larger-than-life character. Here's in 1912 aboard Eddie Meyer's Select Kid Fiat. The days of chain drive, wooden spokes, and hair for helmets. He won a lot of races that were hippodrome races, meaning they were already staged. They already knew who was going to win. Venice was an actual race that he won that came out very clearly as an official event that he won. He also became known as Master Driver of the World. Well, you can't just run around and call yourself Master Driver of the World. You have to earn that distinction. Well, how do you earn that distinction? You win a big race. He won the Cactus Derby, Los Angeles to Phoenix race. And in the midst of doing it, he was awarded this medal. It's a medal about 3 or 4 inches big. I made it nice and big so you can read the whole thing. Oh, it's wonderful. Nice gold medal, diamond encrusted, the whole thing. And it was a cross-country race from LA to Phoenix. Now what made this fun is the Cactus Derby, it was 1914, was they had not only the cars going across, and he won in a Stutz Indy car, by the way, made it all the way across. They had a train full of spectators that was going along, and they called it the Howdy Train, because they could get to the next train, the next stop before the cars could get there. And so they would get there, and as the drivers would ride by, they'd go, "Eh," and they'd have the band on, you know, and just have a big party car is what it amounted to. So I always thought the Howdy Train thing was pretty cool. So he won this medal. And on the back of this medal, it says, "The possessor of this medal has won the Los Angeles Phoenix Road Race, thereby proving himself to be the master driver of the world." Our buddy Barney Oldfield. And he won the Venice Grand Prix Road Race in 1915, so it all connects together. There we have it. Venice Grand Prix race ran only the one time. It was done to promote Venice, promote the fun, the excitement that could happen in Los Angeles, and the beach communities at least. The only reason they did it was because they didn't hold the race at Santa Monica. And we're better than those guys over in Santa Monica anyway. We can always have more fun than them, and they did. They had a very successful event. Nobody died at the event. Santa Monica newspapers, though, was kind of fun in there. They listed a bunch of racing incidents. And anybody who drove to the track or back and got injured along the way, if you got your foot run over when your car was backing up, getting ready to leave, they counted that as a racing incident, you know, so to try and make them look bad. So here's a lot of people that helped out with this. It's all very much appreciated. And really, folks, that's it. That was that. You were supposed to get up and stand in front of them.
Nice
Too late
job,
now.
Harold.
There we go.
Well, they already
I
started.
don't know how long it took, but
Oh, no,
Well, he
here we
wanted
go.
you beyond the camera.
we wanted people to get in front of the camera just to show that it worked out.
Very
well.
good, very good.
People here.
Glad you made it out.
It was good fun.
Yeah.
Oh, it got warm in here.
Take it in hand, and you look twice as
All
much.
right.
Apologies.
So I can throw something at him.
Yeah, they turned the hair on. They didn't turn the hair on.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
seemed like it got cool,
The
but
heat
then it
came
didn't.
on.
Chris is trying to keep it a little hot.
That's it. He kept it warm.
I put it up. I
Take
put
two.
it. I put it. As
I
cool
kept
as,
it moving. I was flying.
Put it as cool as
Job, too,
possible.
Harold.
man.
You're
right here.
very
Yeah, I
polished.
How long did that take?
One more, get you closer.
I don't know. I
Aaron,
There you go.
Aaron, 20.
Hour and 20?
Thanks.
Oh, ramble.
Rambo.
Rambo Ozma.
That was really good.
Yeah, it was. Very
Yeah.
good.
I got Diane listed as a research.
I know, I
It's
saw
only
that.
because the audience was great.
You've come a long way.
Thanks.
That thing
You
really.
bet your buddy Todd that I met, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Stuart Turner.
Yep. Todd of the Bigger Dammer book of sheer manliness.
Well, where's he?
He's going to be there on Wednesday.
Oh, to the museum.
This is way too far north.